Hello, class. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever it may be, depending on what time you're viewing this video. My name is Juan Artiguez, and here I will be showing you my 5 tips for delivering a successful presentation. So for me, to start off with, number one, I believe presenting an idea to your audience is one of the most important, if not the most important thing you can include in your presentation, because if you don't have a general idea that people can follow along with you, your presentation is just not going to be effective in reaching its end goal. So I believe that presenting the idea first will not only make a strong impression on people, it will also give them an idea of what your presentation is going to be about. I found this in the video from the speaker at 1 minute and 10 seconds. And then on to the second point is also from the video at minute 5 and 36 seconds is give the listener a reason to care. The speaker mentions that in order to grab the listener's attention, you need to give them a reason to care. So in this instance, we would include something that they're interested in or a topic that's not discussed enough that will draw them in. So that's another tip that you can include in your presentation. The third tip that I would include in the presentation is to maximize eye contact and use meaningful gestures. This is something that I feel I'm pretty good at. I can maintain good eye contact. In this case, we would have to adapt to stare into a camera, which is something that I'm not a big fan of, but I'm starting to get used to. And using meaningful gestures, it's very important in a presentation, because if you're presenting in front of an audience that has a culture difference, some gestures in their cultures could be considered offensive. So one thing to keep in mind is to be meaningful of your gestures. So that brings me to my fourth tip is make an idea worth sharing. That's located in the video at 7 minutes and 21 seconds. So for this tip, I chose this tip because some ideas are just vague. There's no it's a wide concept. You can go anywhere with it, or it could be boring. Like in tip number 2, it has to be something interesting that the reader doesn't or the listener doesn't hasn't heard. Uh, and that leads me to tip number 5 is to respond to questions after any speech or presentation that you give. There will always be questions. So an important thing for me is to always be ready and prepared to answer questions whenever they're presented to me, especially if they're coming from the media, as stated in the book in section 12.4. And I believe these 5 tips are the most important tips for a successful presentation.